Going to go ahead and open up to the public now. Hello to the folks from the public that have joined. We will be beginning shortly, and we did have one little delay, so we may begin a couple minutes late, but you are in the right place if you're here for the League of Women Voters presentation, Finding Peace After War, How Warriors Transition. We'll be back in just a moment. I apologize for the delay. It looks like the stream has not yet begun automatically on Facebook, so I'm trying to troubleshoot that really quickly. Thank you for your patience. We should be able to begin shortly.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the November program sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Grand Traverse Area, and hosted by Traverse Area Community Media. Our topic today, Finding Peace After War, Warriors in Transition. I am League member Jean Howard, who will be moderating the program. The League of Women Voters is a national nonpartisan organization. The League does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. The League does work to obtain and distribute information to the public about all candidates and their views. The League promotes the informed and active participation of all citizens in government. The League works to increase the understanding of major public policy issues through education and advocacy. Membership in the League is open to women and men of all ages, and we offer a special discount for students. Our program today is being shown on Spectrum Cable Channel 189, the Traverse Area Community Media Facebook page, and the League of Women Voters Grand Traverse Area Facebook page, as well as via Zoom. If you are watching this live on Facebook or Zoom, you can submit questions for our speaker during his presentation in the comment section of Facebook or in the Q&A on Zoom. We will have time for questions after the presentation. Now, in honor of Veterans Day, our speaker today is Major General Nelson J. Cannon, who will speak to us about the experiences of veterans returning from service. General Cannon began his military career in 1967 when he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He served as a combat veteran in Vietnam from November 1967 through January 1969. Following an honorable discharge in 1970, General Cannon enlisted in the Michigan Army National Guard and served in many capacities. His deployed assignments included Commander, Joint Detention Operations Group at Guantanamo Bay and support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Many of you may recognize his name as General Jerry Cannon served as sheriff of Kalkaska County from 1987 to 2004. General Cannon holds a bachelor's in criminal justice from the University of Detroit and a master's in public administration, from Central Michigan University, as well as a master's degree in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. Jerry, please share with us your thoughts on the experiences of veterans returning from combat.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Jane. And I want to thank the Grand Traverse Area League of Women Voters for their interest in this topic and the opportunity to speak. And of course, for that warm introduction. First of all, I'd like to make a couple of comments or caveats about our presentation today. I certainly don't pretend to be some kind of subject matter expert on veterans issues. I have my own opinions, good, bad, and indifferent. My musings today are based on my personal experience and observations of my family. I'm a military brat, come from, my father was a career naval, a member of the Navy, as well as his brothers, my uncles. My career spanning 40 years in uniform in the military. And of course, I have three sons, all of which who have served. One continues to serve, had three deployments to Afghanistan. But the bottom line up front is my comments are generalities, and I acknowledge that there are exceptions, and there's not one path to finding peace that will work for everybody. So with that said, The bottom line up front is all humans are complex creations, rarely perfect, and always in a constant state of development. They are struggling to learn how to deal with the stressors in their life, both military and civilians. And one's failure to adapt can be disastrous. Our life experiences, in many cases, really drive who we are and we strive to become. So the premise, I want to turn my little timer on here. The premise of our talk today is everybody's life is a journey. It involves traumatic experiences that we learn to deal with, so as not to derail our life's plan. Military veterans overcome the shock of combat in a similar way. Some are helpful and others not so much. How veterans transition between both worlds is a precarious process of understanding who they are before they entered the military and the military trauma, and allowing themselves to reclaim their identity and their place when they return home from combat or military service. And if they cannot reconcile and adapt to the fact that everyone else has changed as well, they may be in for a struggle that may last an entire lifetime. So here's some background. Who do we think best understands combat veterans? I would suggest it's probably other veterans. 94% of Americans have no military identity, meaning they have no common military experience. This is just about those who have served. Obviously, the United States population is about 334 million. Those serving in uniform today are less, about 2 million is less than 1%. And if you tried to calculate the number of veterans in our country who have served in the past, there's about 19 million of them, as I've been led to believe. That's less than 6% of the nation's population. Those are the people that have the common bond with those that are currently serving. So when I talk about those currently serving, that's the active and the Guard and the Reserve, anybody that's in any branch of the service. And so obviously the military is not for everyone, but are they really the only ones that are willing to set their personal lives aside and answer their nation's call to serve, giving up their individuality, have some skin in the game for the future of the country, and maybe even willing to risk their lives? I would suggest probably not, but they are the ones that are currently serving. There are countless other ways to serve our nation. Personally, everybody doesn't have to join the military, but I believe every young adult should have some skin in the game, so to speak, about the future of this country. And it would give everybody a vested interest in a lot of different ways, but I've digressed. Military service is a microcosm of our society, and this is where we start the transformation. For me, being a military brat, graduating from Catholic schools, I was predisposed to the structure and the uniformity and the idea of service and national security. And so going into the military was easy for me. What I'd like to do is share a short story. It's really not exclusively about me, but it captures my experience. And so if you could envision a boy from a broken home raised by an Irish Catholic immigrant grandmother in a blue-collar working class Detroit area neighborhood. Grandfather, obviously, my father could not raise a child because he was in the service. So I had to live with my grandmother. When she passed away, I was reunited with my father, who was still serving in the military, who had remarried. And from there, we moved from duty station to duty station until his retirement. When he retired, we moved back to the Detroit area. I was in 8th grade. It was my 13th school. And I was now the oldest of a blended family of 9, 7 children, and of course, my father and his wife. My father was hardworking. I had an abusive stepmother. The family was scraping by. Upon my graduation from high school, I was pushed to move on to the next phase of my life. And again, because we were a military family, the expectation was if you don't have something better going on, and I certainly wasn't cut out to go to college or university at that point in my life, you need to pay your dues. This is what you were born to do, and I was compelled to serve. And like many others in my neighborhood, I joined the Marine Corps. Now, you got to understand, my father was from a Navy background, and so were all my uncles. And so joining the Marine Corps, they had some very strong opinions about that and thought that I had made a mistake and wanted me to reconsider. But the more they didn't want me to do it, of course, I wanted to do it more. And so 20 weeks out of high school, actually 2 weeks out of high school, I was in boot camp. 20 weeks out of high school, I was in Vietnam as a combat Marine in an infantry battalion. I survived the Tet Offensive in Khe Sanh, and obviously several tight spots during that tour of duty. And I prayed for survival, obviously, and committed to not wasting my life if I could survive that. And while I never really understood what my father's concerns were, once I was there, it became perfectly clear. And as a young man, I never thought, even to the bitter end, that I would be killed, but I resigned myself to the fact that I might be hurt. Upon returning from Vietnam, which was kind of awkward, there's a lot of anti-war sentiment at that time. I report to my first stateside assignment, which was also a very complex period for the Marine Corps. I finished my enlistment and I was honorably discharged as a sergeant, and I returned home to my community. But, there's that old adage, you can never really return home. And that's never been more true for me. The challenge was to overcome the perceptions of a Vietnam vet to all my friends, family. It was almost unspoken. They didn't understand what I had been through, and didn't know how to. I didn't know how to talk about it. I was just at that point when I returned, I was just 20 years old, and more troubling for me, thinking that I could take solace and refuge amongst other veterans. The local veterans organization kind of looked down and frowned upon Vietnam vets. Didn't quite measure up to their service in World War II and or Korea. So we were cut off from that support as well. So the easiest thing to do was just kind of compartmentalize that and just let it be and not try to pursue those problems that were inherent with many veterans coming back. For me, having no station in life, leaving as a young person right after high school, I really had no station in life to resume. And so basically I decided I needed to do something to fill this purpose. I needed to have a purpose. So I started my law enforcement career. For me, it was like the next best thing to the military. It's a kind of a paramilitary organization. Obviously, I took advantage of the GI Bill, attended college, married my high school sweetheart, graduated, went to OCS, had command and staff assignments, had promotions, struggled through military education requirements. I had my first deployment, as Gene mentioned, in 03 and 04 to Guantanamo Bay. I retired from my law enforcement career as sheriff in Kalkaska. And in 08 and 09, I deployed a second time for the Army National Guard to Iraq. And then in 2010 and 11, I returned to Iraq for my third deployment. And then retired from the military and started my business. So here's the solution for me. It was to compartmentalize my military and my civilian roles. For me, it was staying busy, having a purpose, staying focused, and goal-oriented was, my path to finding peace. Is there a price to pay for that? Absolutely. Obviously, my family made many sacrifices so I could pursue this course of action. And truth be told, never really sorted out all those unresolved issues and resentments about being from the public, about being a Vietnam vet. And so that's one journey of one person. We all hope to return from those experiences better for our military service in general and combat in particular, a better person than when we left. Obviously, combat changes everybody, even those that join the military and never see combat. Military service changes people. And so here are some of the potential obstacles that military service presents to an individual. Obviously, from the civilian to the military, there's a transition that has to be made. It's all learned behavior. It's a team mindset as opposed to being an individual. It's kind of like a rite of passage. Obviously, you separate yourself from your family. You go into this transition where you learn your skills as a member of the military. You are tested and you grow. You grow as a person individually, and then you return. And so you have this warrior ethos that's instilled in you. You learn these values, these principles of loyalty and duty and responsibility and selfless service, and the meaning of honor and integrity and personal courage. You learn to be competent, and you learn to be confident in your skill set, and you are very decisive, and you are successful, and you're disciplined, and you are purpose driven, and you want structure in your life. You solve problems, you improvise, you adapt, you overcome. Your MOS, your skills that the military has taught you, you are so good at it, it's automatic. It's like second nature to you. The techniques and the tactics and the procedures that you learn are all action oriented. And you've instilled, in many cases, because of the overseas service, an awareness of what's going on in the world. So, in all of that, from civilian to military, you enter combat. And combat is everything that you've been trained to do. And we have the best, and you want to be the best. And if there are character weaknesses or flaws in an individual, and we're all good at masking those weaknesses, but combat can magnify those upon your service in combat, or even when you return home. Obviously, there's no glamour in combat. Going in, you're tentative. You don't know really what you're getting into, but you learn fast. And then coming home, I'll tell you my own experience. When I first got there, it was just a blur. And then you learn your lessons fast. And then the next 12 months goes by like you don't even know how you got there. And at the end, you're tentative again because you're worried about getting out of there in one piece and making it home safely. So there's a common purpose, teamwork. You have your battle buddies. Combat is chaos. You have respect. You have earned respect and great responsibility at a young age. You learn about life and death. And many times when a veteran would come home with all that responsibility as a young person, you come home and there's nothing to compare. And the jobs that you're probably qualified for are low skill, low pay. So you go from being some of the best in the world at what you do to being minimized. No recognition, no respect. And that's a challenge for many people. Combat also tests you in many different ways. one of the challenges, military units go overseas in combat together. When they come back, they kind of matter of fact, in World War II, you'd come home on the ship and you had about 30 days to kind of decompress and kind of get yourself back to a sensible state of mind before you got back with your family. In my experience in Vietnam, I went over there as an individual augmentee. I got out of my school, went overseas, had to make my way to my unit. And when I was done, one day you're in the fight, next day it's a plane ride home, and you're home. I mean, there's no time to deconflict, no time to decompress. Matter of fact, when we were ramping up to go overseas, the original plan was we were going to go over by ship. So there had been a lot of training and what have you, getting you ready for that. Last minute, things were heating up. It says everybody's going to fly over. So we were there quicker than we could ever have imagined. When you're there, you endure the unimaginable. You're hyper vigilant. You can never relax. You're hyper vigilant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days. It almost makes you want to become a control freak, leaving nothing to chance. And many veterans who have seen combat have seen more and done more than most people would do in their entire life. And people don't recognize that. And they don't appreciate what those people have done. Just during one enlistment or one deployment, you become desensitized. You struggle with grief and death, but you have to put it aside and move on. There's a sense of hopelessness. I can tell you, matter of fact, when I had first gotten overseas, when I reported to my unit, we were all up in, I was in the Marine Corps then, I was enlisted. And I was just reported into my unit's forward operating base was at a artillery base called Camp Carroll. And the enemy had targeted, they knew that this artillery base was there. And so I was there and we took hundreds of rounds of incoming. And you have this sense of hopelessness that, as a matter of fact, I remember distinctly that rounds were going off all over this fire base. And I thought I needed to move because there didn't seem like there was any other place that hadn't been struck by an artillery round that I should move. And I remember an old staff sergeant said, just stay put. Just stay put. They've got these all pre-calculated. If they haven't hit it yet, they're probably not going to hit it. And so, my point is that there's a lot of hopelessness, that you're out of control in certain situations. You accept being injured. You deny death. You try to have no regrets about what you've had to do. You rationalize. You trust your instincts. You trust your battle buddies. You have a sixth sense of what's going on. The excitement of living in the moment is irreplaceable. But again, combat's not fashionable. These are not the things you come home to and people want to glamorize. Again, back in my day, coming back from Vietnam, there was an anti-Vietnam movement. So, the world is an ugly place. And most of us in the United States don't realize we live in the greatest country in the world. The world is an ugly place. War is uglier and combat is the ugliest. It absolutely changes people forever. So you make your, and I keep, I've had a number of deployments, but when I talk about combat, that's back earlier in my career as a young man. So when you're returning home, when you rotate out of country, you're excited to do that. Active duty units who go together and come back together, I think they do it the best because they stay together and they support each other and they go back to a base and their families are all been together and their support systems and networks and programs to help everybody. The National Guard has many of those respect, but when we get back to home station, we go to the four corners of the state. There's really we're not all living in the same community. That presents challenges and problems. And if you go as an individual, it's even worse because there is no homecoming ceremony. There's nothing. You just go home and you kind of try to fit back in. So you're in the fight one day and you're home the next. And there are great efforts to support the mental health needs of our returning veterans, but I can tell you, I've done this dozens of times, welcoming home subordinate units in my command. And you ask the question, is anybody feeling vulnerable? Nobody's going to answer that question. They want to go home. They're not going to raise their hand. If you said you thought you were vulnerable, you would be taken out of the group and set aside and delayed in returning home. Nobody wants to answer that question because they want to go home. It's best to get back, at least in the National Guard experience, it's best to get back to that drill status with that peer support as soon as possible. It's all programmed. There's a cycle that everybody works through. And if you're discharged at the end of your enlistment, things get risky because you don't have that support network. There's great emotional stress on families during and after deployments. All the things you can imagine when the breadwinner leaves, the spouse has to assume all those responsibilities at the home, making everything work with only half the team at home. It's a problem, and it's a problem for the family. They endure, and when the service member comes home, there's a lot of renegotiations that have to take place for everybody to kind of reassert themselves and reclaim their role in the family. That can be a challenge in and of itself, on top of everything else that they had to deal with and the baggage that they carry when they return home. So returning home is really the hardest part. Each service member has unique obstacles that they need to overcome, both personally and socially and psychologically. But the key is to acknowledge that change has to be the first step. You have changed, and they have changed. The community has changed. People that you know, your friends, they have changed as well. And I always like to use the analogy of if someone left home to go on world travels, and we always have rose-colored visions of what life is like back home, but it's changing. As you're gone, it's changing. And when you come back, you just want to reinsert yourself in the place that you were when you left. It's not there anymore. You've changed, and the community has changed as well. So trying to pick up where you left off, trying to fit back in, you have to commit yourself to that because it's not an easy transition. Many veterans try to avoid the appearance of vulnerability. They just don't talk about it. They won't ask for help. They won't acknowledge the need for help, at least not early on. Again, I mentioned there's really no transition or decompression time. You're either in the fight, and shortly thereafter, you're home. And again, Vietnam was with all the protest marching, and you were shunned by the older vets. And it's not the ending that we envisioned. It's not the ending that you saw in World War II. It's not the ending that you would see in movies. It's none of that. And many of us, that was our only exposure to what we could probably expect. War and combat changes people, and life has also changed their world. And feeling the lack of purpose and respect and responsibility is tough. In my case, I started my law enforcement career. That allowed me to compartmentalize that as well. One of the biggest challenges is trying to forget the many things, the unimaginable things that people were called upon to do. You can imagine what those are. Dealing with flashbacks, things you did, and maybe things you didn't do that you wish you'd have done, things that you saw, things that you experienced, things that you observed. You can never get those images and thoughts out of your head. And especially if you felt some responsibility for any of the bad things that might have happened while you were deployed within your unit. So how do people find meaning and purpose and happiness? First of all, I would say happiness is not the goal. I think if you can find meaning and purpose in your life, the happiness will follow. Many vets cannot transition. They take, not many vets, some vets, not many vets, probably some vets we all know, cannot make the transition, and they take refuge in substance abuse. Were they devastated? Were they depressed before? Did combat do that to them? Were they predisposed to self-destruction? We don't know. Obviously, when the military tries to screen those weaknesses out of recruits before they accept them into the military, but I would venture to say that's not the problem. The problem is what they saw and experienced in combat, and so maybe their life experience before going in the military was such that they weren't, I won't say hardened, but they weren't prepared to deal with the things that they were going to see in combat. In my experience, the World War II vets, those that I knew in my neighborhood, in my community, they were the leaders. They were strong, they were successful, they were engaged, they did everything. They were on the town council, they ran Little League, they were in the Knights of Columbus, they did it all. And so they were my role model. They found a way. How did they overcome the shock of combat and reclaim their place, peace and quiet in their community, in their faith, in their family, in their friends? How did they do that? I don't know. Different generations, obviously. They were called the greatest generation. Probably, World War II was probably the most honorable conflict that our country ever participated in. So they had that all going for them. Were they more grounded in who they were before they went into the military? Or has society changed since then? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. Acknowledging that change has and will occur to you and others is an imperative. You have to. I wish somebody would have told me this, explained all this to me before. I mean, the things that I know now, I wish I'd have known 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it is what it is. Acknowledging that change has and will occur is an imperative that everybody needs to understand. Not only in yourself as an individual, but your family, your community, maybe even your work. So you have to embrace the challenge of returning. You have to embrace it with vigor and courage and enthusiasm, while at the same time dealing with those underlying issues that could often hold you back. Obviously, nobody likes to be told. Obviously, when you're in the military, you give up your individuality. But when you return, you don't want to be told what to do anymore. And so I would encourage most young veterans, and I've had this conversation with many, you don't have to respond, but just listen to the advice and the counsel and just consider it. Just take it in and think about it. Be quiet. Try to be peaceful. It'll help you sort things out. Be patient with yourself. There's no need to rush into the transition. Take all the time that you need. But you got to understand that the longer you linger, the harder it becomes. Learn about and from the bad experiences of military service and combat. Appreciate your individuality. I mean, obviously, when you come back from this very driven, purpose-filled life to a very laid-back, hey, it's whatever you want to do. It's up to you. Nobody's going to push you environment. That can be frustrating, but relish it. Learn that the laid-back lifestyle is the future. It's your life in the future. Repurpose their military skill set. In my case, going into law enforcement is perfect. Kind of a paramilitary organization. There's a rank structure. You kind of know where you fit in. You kind of do your duty. A little bit of risk involved. It wasn't always about the risk, but you were serving. Your life had purpose. And even as a young man, I got hired on the police force when I was 22. I mean, it was such a blessing. But that you were respected because police officers, at least then, were respected in their community. But I would also encourage those to remain in touch with their battle buddies. You don't want to have any regrets. You don't need to, you certainly don't want to have any regrets, and time will temper regrets. God forbid, if I've learned over time, if I have a concern about a friend, I have to act on it almost right away. I can't tell you the number of times that I didn't, and not that they self-harmed themselves, but bad things happen, people pass away, and I didn't go and see them, and I feel bad about that. And so remorse is inconsolable. And so if you take care of your battle buddy, keep in touch, make sure everybody's doing okay. I've had to deal with with death in the military a number of times, and soldiers of mine who have self-harmed themselves. I mean, and I missed it for whatever reason. And I can tell you that veterans are excellent at masking, if they chose to do so, at masking their trauma, their difficulties, and I missed it, and I regret that, and I don't know, and I'm more vigilant now than I ever was before about keeping in touch with those that I've served with, because I would just hate to see people that I went through that traumatic experience with meet their demise in a self-harm way. Finding balance between being a veteran and being a civilian, you don't need to forgo either one of those. The burdens of war and combat will be with us for the rest of our lives. But you can be resilient. You need to seek out new challenges. Again, I said before, happiness is not the goal. It's about finding a purpose and a meaning for your life. And like myself, stay active, accomplish whatever, stay productive. So, in conclusion, we are complex creations. None of us is perfect, and we are always in a state of transition. And as we mature, we come to better understand the larger context of our combat war experience. Obviously, as a young man, I served in an organization that I didn't know anything else that was going on in Washington, D.C. or Vietnam headquarters, or I just knew what was going on in our little part of the world. But as we get older and we are more read and understand, it can taint our idea of what we did. But those revelations should not disrupt the balance that we've achieved between military and civilian lives. As unsettling as they now seem, we only knew what we were told then without the benefit of hindsight. This is easier said than done. Disappointment and regrets will be tempered by time. More importantly, make sure your battle buddy is always okay. I have been blessed with good fortune of having made peace with both worlds that I have lived in. I'm proud of my service. I'm proud of all veterans. I give them the recognition and support and respect that they deserve. And I personally, I pray for strength and patience and wisdom and understanding, probably most importantly, understanding, forgiveness, and the will to keep moving forward. That's my advice. That's my counsel. That's, I think, the secret to my success. And with that, Jean, I'll open it up to any questions anybody might have.
Thank you, Jerry, for a very insightful presentation. So our audience has been listening. We do have some questions for you. And if anyone has not submitted a question yet that wants to, you can still do so via Facebook or the Q&A on Zoom. But I'm going to start with one thing you mentioned was the something about the young people all should serve. Now, I know in Israel, you serve 2 years in the military period once you reach a certain age. Do you think something like that should be in the US?
Well, I think it should, but I don't think it ever will. But the point is everybody needs to have something in common, and we don't have that anymore. And so everybody needs to have a little skin in the game, so to speak, and about the common good of this country. I mean, this is a wonderful place, and unless you leave the United States and go see how bad it is out there in the world, this is a great place. But I think a lot of people just take it for granted. And I'm not saying the less than 1% that are currently serving are the only ones that care about that. I know that's not the case. But I think if everybody had, and you don't have to be in the military, you could join. There's all kinds of ways that the government would allow you to serve. The Peace Corps, or you want to be in the Medical Service Corps. There's all kinds of things to do. If you don't want, as a matter of fact, even in the military, for every Marine or soldier that's out there pulling the trigger, there is 100 other positions in support of that person, logistics and medical and cooks. And you can just imagine administrative, all of that. I mean, there's ways to serve, and everybody, I think at the end of the day, would have this commonality about we serve, and you'd have a story to tell. I mean, vets like to tell their story. And so it'd be nice, like, hey, tell me the story about being in the Merchant Marines, or tell me the story about being, fighting COVID. One of my last commands was the Military Police Command in Lansing. They are now for Army North in for the continental United States, heading up the military's response for the COVID pandemic. Okay. I mean, and there are medical people involved doing that as well with them. We just kind of provide this infrastructure to help make it happen. I mean, I think everybody needs to have a little skin in the game. It would bring us closer together as a nation than we are now.
Thank you. Another question. With Veterans Day recently past us, I noticed a lot of media attention to veterans with personal profiles. Do you think the discussion of PTSD, homelessness, suicide rates, physical injuries, etc., that stigmatizes veterans?
Well, you would think that, but every veteran doesn't have those dilemmas to deal with. It's a small percentage, and why? They could have been predisposed to that end in their life before they even joined the military, or it could be because of combat. But I think you're right. I think it needs attention. It doesn't need to be, in my view, so widespread. We certainly need to deal with those issues. We need to help those people. But I think you're right. It probably does create the impression that all veterans have problems that they have difficulty dealing with. Not necessarily. I would like to hold myself out as an example of someone who found the way. And I'm not the exception. Believe me, I know thousands of veterans who are very successful in their lives and have made that transition, either by dealing with the issues in some other way or compartmentalizing these two different lives that we live, one in the military and one we lived in the military, or you're still serving in the military, and one on the civilian side. So yeah, I don't think it deserves, the veterans who are involved or directly affected, they need attention. But I don't think when you paint with such a broad brush, I think it could be misleading and create misunderstandings.
Thank you. Another question. Thank you for this presentation and your service to our country. Are there veterans services that are available which we may not be aware of? If so, what are they?
Well, our VA in Northern Michigan here, we're blessed with great Veterans Administration services with clinics scattered throughout the region. Military units, the National Guard, there's all kinds of services available. For veterans, the VA is the most logical way to pursue that kind of relief. But the health services in the community, I think there's all kinds of ways that people can, there shouldn't be a stigma attached to asking for help. And I think we've learned from Vietnam that we need to do better. And I think our country is doing better. Here's the challenge. Many veterans refuse to ask. They just don't want to acknowledge that they need that help. And they're going to man up and deal with it in their own way, on their own terms. Don't want to be told what to do anymore. But I think the VA is the most logical. National Guard has great services. Obviously, it's a spinoff. I mean, they're all interface with the VA. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force, Coast Guard, you name it, they all have services available. If you went to any veteran at all, they all know veterans will help veterans. If you have somebody, a battle buddy, and they ask for help, we will find, we won't put it off. We will find an immediate course of action to get that veteran the services that they need.
You may have touched on this next question, but because of the military is very regimented, does it make it more difficult to return to civilian life where one must compete with people their age who have used their time going to college or building their work experience? What is available to help veterans promote their maturity, responsibility, and life experiences?
Well, the Veteran Services has a program to help veterans do that. And veterans bring a lot. I mean, a lot of businesses need what veterans offer. Purpose-driven, structured, someone that can lead or someone that can follow orders. Everybody wants to be the leader. Well, we need some good followers as well. Someone that will complete a task. Someone will show up for work. Someone who's had great responsibility, life and death responsibility, has self-respect. We talk about those values of the Army and loyalty and duty and respect and honor, selfless, all that. I mean, corporations need that. They want that. And so I think most veterans, if they've reconciled that the next challenge is getting on with your life, not wallowing in the things that you may have missed, the opportunities that you may have missed, the remote, any of that. You can't. The next challenge is getting on with your life. What are you going to do? What's going to give you purpose and meaning, and what's going to make you happy? And I think veterans bring, obviously some. I can tell you one example. In Michigan, to be a police officer, you have to go to a police academy now. And so the police academy is, we'll just say it's 18 weeks. We brought to Northern Michigan, he said, listen, a veteran who is a military police officer, not just an Army military police officer, any kind of a military police officer, Army, Navy, Air Force, you name it, and went to a Department of Defense military police school, should not have to come back to Michigan and go to a police academy that's 18 weeks long. They've already had 12 weeks of that. And we got it passed by our state legislature, our licensing authority, the MCOL, said, all right, we're going to give credit for all of that service, all that training, and we're going to have an academy that will be 6 weeks long. And then they will become certifiable Michigan police officers and can be hired. That's now been moved up to 7 weeks. But my point is, we've done that for police officers. We've done that for EMTs. We've done that for, like engineers who are plumbers and electricians and what have you. So you can take that military skill set and make that transition and bring all those other benefits that a veteran brings to the table to an organization.
Okay, next question. Are most veterans registered to vote? And if not, how do you see the League of Women Voters help to encourage them to register to vote and have a voice in their government?
I think most veterans understand the importance of voting. I won't say everybody, but I think the vast majority are registered to vote. They are aware from their time in service on. I think they have a view of the world and our place in the world, more so than maybe the average person. So my experience is they vote. Now, I'm not saying people don't get angry and frustrated and refuse to vote, but the circle of friends that I associate with, they all vote. I know it's not perfect. It's not 100%, but I think the vast majority do. I could be wrong. I haven't heard or read anything to the contrary. But anyway, doing things like this again, I applaud the Grand Traverse Area League of Women Voters for this program. Things like this are very helpful. I know you marketed it throughout the area. I'm not sure how many people are going to catch up later and participate in viewing this. But these are the kinds of things that are important. And veterans, that their concerns are equally as important as many others. Oftentimes we just look at, the local issues, but voting transcends local and goes, all the way to the national elections as well. So I hope they're all voting.
Well, we do too. We encourage everybody to vote.
Absolutely.
So,
You do a great job.
Jerry, another question here. Now we have an all voluntary military. What is the biggest motivation for people to serve in the military these days?
Well, it's it depends on the individual. I can tell you that not that I came from an impoverished area, but it was a blue collar community, and many of us, almost everybody, there was this expectation that you would serve in the military. And it provides tremendous opportunities. Obviously, the GI Bill, I took advantage of the GI Bill. I was the first in my family, even my extended family, to go to college or university. So it may be the ticket out of a lifestyle that is not to your liking and you want something better. It could just be it's family tradition. We all serve. It could be, it all depends on the individual. I think people are motivated for, back in this was not my experience. I want to qualify that, but back in the heat of the Vietnam War, there was a draft, and so people that didn't want to go were drafted and they had to go. And we've all heard these funny. I had to report to Fort Wayne, which was like right down the street from where I was born. And so, I go to Fort Wayne and it's all kinds of people coming there. I had enlisted, I joined. And so there's all kinds of people there. So the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and Navy and the Coast, everybody's kind of spread out. And whoever doesn't have a lot of people hasn't met their quota. They take those people that were the draftees and they say, all right, line up, count off, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the ones, step forward. You're now in the Marine Corps. These people's hair is on fire. I don't want to be a Marine. They should have did something about that. But my point is, there were people like, they were drafted and they ended up serving their country honorably. Don't get me wrong. But there were other people. I have friends who the judge said, if you don't straight up and fly right, you're going to end up in jail. I'm going to give you a choice. Join a service. It'll straighten you out. They did. It did. And so I'm not saying that was not my experience, but I'm saying a lot of people join for a lot of different reasons. Just to get out of a home life that they're not satisfied with. Maybe they want join the Navy and see the world. I mean, who knows? I mean, everybody has a different idea about what motivated them to do that. I'm thankful that they did. I think more people should serve. The military struggles with meeting their quotas to keep the end strength up. And I got to tell you, young people, academically and physically, can't pass muster. I mean, they can't. Yeah, they're not healthy. They're overweight, or they can't pass the test. It's a challenge to find those the people that can pass the test that want to serve. It's a challenge. I mean, we have an organization that works on trying to get young people to be physically fit, so they're at least physically fit and able to take the test to get in. If you can't even pass the physical agility test, you're not going to. The military is very, very. You got to be physically fit. I mean, it's very demanding physically. So, I think it depends on the individual. I think the stories are unlimited as to the reasons why people join.
Okay, here's a follow-up to the voter registration question. Would it be appropriate to have a voter registration campaign at a military base or VA location or at a location like Camp Grayling?
Again, I think most of the veterans vote. It's interesting. It would be, I don't know if somebody's tried that. I don't know what the results have been. Again, at Camp Grayling, there's only about 200 people that work there, and they don't live there. They live out in the community. They're civilians, and they just come there to work. When we go to drill, you'd have to be there at the right time when they would, like an engineer company or MP company was there. But to register them, you'd have to do it at their home station. Many people that come to Grayling, don't live in this area. They don't live in northern Michigan. Some of them come from downstate. In the summer, we have, 10, 12,000 people at Camp Grayling. But many of them aren't from this area. It's an interesting idea. I don't know what the percentage, I don't know if it would be worth the effort. If someone could identify that it's a problem, that a lot of people are not unregistered, that are unregistered, that might help drive a good decision on whether that would work. It's interesting. It certainly couldn't hurt. I just don't know how productive it would be. I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess. Again, my experience, I think most veterans are already registered to vote and vote.
Okay, here's another question. It seems that a lot of military recruits are young. Have you noticed if younger or older veterans struggle differently in their return to civilian life?
I think the more life experience you've had, maybe the better soldier you would be. But at the same time, that's a double-edged sword. Obviously, if you didn't manage your expectation, if you have the life experience and for example, myself, when I come back, I had no societal role. I was just a kid out of high school, gone, come back. It wasn't like, oh, son of a gun. Sorry about that. I got my little timer on here. So I had no place in the community to return to. As opposed to if you were the plant manager and you deployed and then you came back and all of a sudden that job was gone. That happens many times, especially with the National Guard. It's like, hey, if I get deployed, they're gonna automate my job and I won't have a job to come back to. That's a challenge. And that's like a dilemma that, listen, you join, that you're gonna have to do this at some point or other. I think it's easier for young people to come back like myself who don't have a role to try to reclaim as opposed to older people. But at the same time, I think an older veteran would be more successful in the military because they've got more life experience. That's value added. I don't know if did that answer the question?
Another question here. This person says, I think it is important to repeat the vast majority of military members that transition to civilian life without issues. Yes, the structure and limitations of the military is different than most civilian companies and groups. I think a vast majority of veterans adjust fine, just like people that change careers or jobs. And they also add, the military does have voting campaigns to encourage members to vote, mostly associated with active duty locations.
I agree 100%.
Okay, another one. During World War II, the civilian population made sacrifices such as rationing of goods. Today, it seems that we simply farm out the dirty work and have no responsibility. How can that be changed?
Well, one thing I always advocated was, if we're going to war, that there needs to be a war tax. That would affect everybody. So right now, we did Afghanistan and we did Iraq all on a credit card. So we have tremendous national debt, and it's kind of, nobody's bearing that. I mean, maybe indirectly people are aware of that, and maybe there's a little bit of concern about it, but most part, nobody felt that. Nobody felt that cost of that war. So we just, you just add to the national debt. I think if you're going to go to war, how are we going to pay for it? And so we did that in World War II. And after World War II, we were in big debt, and everybody paid big taxes to pay that debt down. And so I think people have to feel that pain. It's not just a sacrifice of the family. It's like, hey, it's going to affect each and every one of us some way or another. And in the pocketbook is one of those ways. And so I think that in today's society, as advanced as we are, that's probably the only way that I can easily think of. And I've always advocated for, like, we just can't, it's too easy just to add it to the debt. Everybody needs to step up and pony up and pay their fair share. If they don't like that, then get on the legislators and say, hey, why are we doing this? Why would we be in Vietnam for years and years? Why would we be in Afghanistan for 20 years? Why are we doing this? And of course, if you don't understand, the national, it's all because of our national interests. But it's like, is the national interest shared by everybody in the country, or the majority of the people in the country, or not? And so again, I think having a war tax, if we're going to go to war, and these aren't called wars or conflicts, I understand that, but we can remedy that. The legislators can do something about that. We need to pay for that, and not just keep adding it to the national debt. That way, everybody would share in that burden somehow or another, one way or another.
Okay, another question. Warriors transition. Families who remain back home must transition too. What services are provided families, and what qualities or characteristics do you see in families that adapt the best?
Well, every unit will have, I can talk about the National Guard. I'm sure this is the same. Our models are after the active duty, but and there's family tension. There's family tension pre-deployment. There's family tension during the deployment. There's family. I mean, it's a lot of angst and anxiety. We have organizations create what's called a family readiness group, getting people ready for that. The challenge is, for active duty, everybody lives on a base. And so if the refrigerator breaks, you call the DPW and they come and fix the refrigerator, or the furnace, or the heater, or the water, or whatever. In the National Guard, they're spread out throughout the state. We don't have that. It's a challenge. And families don't want to ask for help either. They're self-reliant, so they're going to rely on their family. And so when we find out, we try to take care of that family. But the family readiness group, they're going to have a monthly meeting. And so the family is spread across the state, has to come to some place. It's easier said than done. Winter, weather, family disruptions, childcare. I mean, it's just, it's a burden. But there's programs available. In a perfect world, it looks great on paper. It's not as good as it could be. The active duty have it the best because everybody is together there. But there are challenges for the family, and God bless my wife, Liz. I mean, she had to pick up the slack while I was gone and do all those things around here that I had to do. And, my youngest son, it affected him, my being gone. He used to go out to our shop and just piddle around, and she's, your boy's out there. He's missing you. I go, I don't need this. I can't. You're making it harder. It's tough on families. I get it. And so my hat's off to them. We recognize them. We know that they share a tremendous burden now while their service member is deployed away, and all kinds of challenges. I mean, we have in emergencies, we have funds to help families, but we don't know. Families don't ask for help. People are proud, and they just don't want to be a burden, and that's not the opinion of. But if we don't know, we can't do anything about it, and it's a challenge for I would say for the Guard and the reserves.
We just have time for a couple more questions here. Talk about VA hospitals and the recent changes that allow a vet to be served at a local hospital or with a local physician rather than driving downstate, for half an hour or for half a day. They're now served by local doctors. How and why was this change made?
Well, it was made because of the delays. I mean, you'd call those major medical centers, and you'd get on a list, and they would play games with the list. I mean, we'd pass a rule like you got to see them within 30 days. It's all on how you pose the question to the patient, and so it changed because we were not serving veterans, and veterans were dying in the meantime because they weren't getting the care. So I mean, it was like a rude awakening. And so this is much, much better. And I can give you one example of, I had a veteran in my neighborhood here who came to me. We used to serve together years ago at Camp Grayling. He came to me and he said, he was having medical issues, serious medical issues. And he needed to, and he was working with the VAs, going to Saginaw. And then he come back and says, they lost my records. It was just one thing after another. He says, I need to get this. I need to get an MRI. So I said on our hospital board, so I went to our CEO and I said, I'll pay for it. This guy needs an MRI to shortcut this bureaucracy so he can go down to the doctor and say, I've got an MRI. Look at this one. Tell me I need this so I can get the procedure done. Obviously, we got this all worked out. But the point is, allowing them to deal with this locally is a much better solution. Now, I understand coming from the military, when you retire, all your medical records, I think they should be simultaneous. But when you leave the military, well, here's your medical record, and you're supposed to give that to the VA. Well, that should just happen automatically. And so, but you lose your records. There is no record. And I had the record, but I don't know what I did with the record. I mean, all of that. Now you can do telemedicine. Now you got all the records are digitized. I mean, it should be as easy as that to go. And I know the VA would say, we want to know everything that happened to this veteran. Well, you can figure this all out with electronic records. This doctor can send it to you and you can stick it in the file. And for a disability pension, you'd really want to have all your records in one place. I get all that. That can be done. You can take the record from the local doctor and give it to the VA to put in your file if it can't happen electronically. It was a terrible tragedy that it had to come to this, but it's a great idea and it's worked well. And I think it'll continue to be refined. And I don't think the VA is going to be hurt in the long run by doing it this way. And it's easier to go to a local doctor than to drive, like you said, half a day to Saginaw, wait. I had to go down to the hospital in Detroit, and I goes, why do I have? Well, this is where this expert is that you have to see in Detroit. We'll pay your mileage. I said, I don't care about the mileage. I don't know nobody. You don't know me. I don't know you. I don't know where to park. Blah blah blah. All of that. I said, this is like I have to spend the night. I got family down there, so I get to go visit. But for those that don't have the wherewithal, I mean, local is best. Local is the best way to deal with it, especially if it's your family doctor. And I know a lot of veterans don't have family doctors, so they rely on the VA. And this is better. This is so much better.
Okay, one last question here. I have heard that there is talk about having a military cemetery in northern Michigan. Do you have any information on this subject?
Well, we've been trying. We have a veteran cemetery in Battle Creek, and we have one in Holly. That's all in the southern tier of the state. There's nothing north of, we'll just say Holly, nothing north, nothing in the UP. We have veterans in Michigan from the UP that if they want to be buried in a national cemetery, have to go to Wisconsin. This isn't right. This isn't right. And you look at other states, they have more. We're a big state. And so there's other states that aren't as big as us that have more cemeteries than us. And so we think that we should have a national cemetery. And if it can't be a national cemetery, then our state Department of Military and Veterans Affairs should step up and help with facilitating that with the VA. And I would subscribe that it needs to be in or around Camp Grayling. I mean, that's better than, I mean, it's not a perfect answer. The UP would say we want it in the UP, you know, and we'd say, well, you know, let's start here in the northern lower, and it would draw from 2/3 of the state. Obviously, we don't have the biggest population compared to the southern parts of the state, but it would draw. And I think Camp Grayling area would be a great place to do it. And veterans could stop by the base, they get their ID cards, all of those kinds of things. Stop in the PX. I think it's needed. It's long overdue. We actually have 2 veterans buried on Camp Grayling right now. And so we could just kind of expand on that idea and do something else like that on a grander scale. There are ways to go about that. There are people that are talking about that. There is interest. We're going to keep pursuing it. It's obviously not something that's going to happen in the near term, but you know, we keep leaning forward and putting the pressure where it needs to be to try to make that happen. I think we'll prevail. I think we will prevail over time.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much for spending some time with us and educating us about warriors and their transition. And a lot of us have had family members I know who have served in the military, and we appreciate all of you. And my husband served his 2 years in the public health service, they called it. But anyway, 2 years. When all medical students during the Vietnam era, when you got out of medical school, you spent 2 years somewhere. But thanks, many thanks to General Jerry Cannon and to our audience for tuning in today. And also thanks to Matt Kern of the Traverse Area Community Media, who keeps us all going on video here. So thank you so much, Matt. Thank you again, Jerry. Now, to find out more about the League or to join, please visit our website at lwvgta.org. Our December program will be Voting Rights Matter, Be Informed. It will be virtual and be December 1st from noon to 1:30, when Margaret Goldman will present information on the bills going through the Michigan legislature that will affect the voting process in our state. And our January program will be Climate Change and Your Health. It will also be virtual from noon to 1:30 on January 18th, 2022. So both of these programs will be able to be viewed on channel 189 as well as via Zoom and Facebook. So tell your friends. All our programs are available for viewing later on the Traverse Area Community Media Facebook page and the League of Women Voters Grand Traverse Area Facebook page. They may also be viewed on Spectrum Cable TV channel 189 in Northwest Lower Michigan. Thank you again for being with us, and have a wonderful afternoon.